There are moments when people meet and nothing about it feels loud. No single moment you could point to and say, this was it. Just a passing glance, a simple sentence, or even a silence that lingers just a little longer than it does with others. And somehow, you as a Taurus feel something shift inside you. Not a rush. Not that sudden spark people talk about. Just a slowing down. Like walking into a room you've been in before, but the light feels slightly different that day. You can't quite name it. But you know you've felt something like this before. And the strange part is, you don't try to move closer. You don't try to walk away either. You just notice them. In a very natural way. It could have been an ordinary afternoon. The kind that looks like every other day. You're sitting in a familiar cafe, your drink still warm in your hands, the background noise soft enough to feel alive, but not enough to pull your attention. And then they walk in. Nothing dramatic. No spotlight. No cinematic moment. Just another person crossing through your life like so many others have. But this time, you realize you look up just a little longer than usual. Not out of curiosity. Not because you're clearly drawn in. Just you don't rush to look away. For Taurus, that alone is already something. You're used to keeping your rhythm steady. You don't easily let someone unfamiliar step into your space, even if it's only in your thoughts. But there's something about them that makes you feel like you don't have to brace yourself. Like taking your shoes off after a long day and feeling the cool floor beneath your feet. Your body relaxes before you even realize it. No one told you to. There's no clear reason. You just feel at ease. Maybe you didn't talk much. Maybe just a few casual words or nothing at all. And yet, somehow their presence stays with you longer than it usually would. Not loudly. Not taking over your mind. Just quietly. Like a song you heard somewhere once. You don't remember the lyrics. You don't remember the name. But the melody keeps returning, softly, in the background. You don't try to figure it out. You don't try to hold on to it. You just let it be there, and in the days that follow, you start noticing something small. You don't look for them. But you notice if they appear. You don't wait for a message. But when your phone vibrates, there's a faint sense of hope. Not strong enough to call it expectation. But not entirely random either. Like leaving a chair empty beside you, not reserved for anyone, but if someone sits there, it doesn't feel out of place. Taurus doesn't easily get pulled into things that feel uncertain. You prefer what's clear. What you can touch. What you can build slowly over time. And yet sometimes, it's the unclear things that make you pause the longest. Not because you believe in them, but because you can't quite ignore them either. You may have met many people before. People more interesting, more expressive. People who made you laugh more. But not everyone makes you slow down. And maybe, what holds your attention isn't really who they are. It's who you become when you're around them. A little less tense. A little less careful about what to say next. A little less focused on holding your image together. You don't have to be better. You don't have to perform. You just are. And for Taurus, that's not always easy to find. There are small moments you're not even sure are real. Sitting in silence together without it feeling awkward. Looking at them a second longer and they don't look away. A simple sentence that stays with you longer than you expected. There's nothing clear to analyze. Just a sense of familiarity. But not the kind that comes from time spent together. The kind that feels familiar even without shared memories. You might wonder if you're overthinking it. Maybe you are. Maybe you're not. But the important part isn't the answer. It's the fact that you paused long enough to ask. You, someone who usually moves through life with a steady, grounded rhythm, are allowing something undefined to exist. Without labeling it. Without concluding anything. Just letting it be. Like tending to a plant. There are days you don't see it grow. No visible change. Nothing obvious. And still you water it. You leave it where the light can reach. Not because you know what it will become. But because something in you feels it deserves care. And maybe this connection is like that. It doesn't need a name yet. It doesn't need to be understood right away. It's just a quiet presence. But enough to make you realize something inside you is beginning to shift. Very slowly, very softly, but real. And there are things you only begin to notice when you let yourself slow down long enough. Not a knowing that comes from thinking. Not something you can explain with clear, logical words. But a quieter kind of recognition. Like walking into a place and instantly feeling at ease, even though you've never been there before. Or standing next to someone and realizing you don't have to adjust yourself to fit. Not because they're doing anything extraordinary. Just you don't have to change. Taurus is used to keeping things within reach. Within control. You notice details. You feel the subtle shifts in the air, in a tone of voice, in the way someone responds. You don't let people in easily, not without watching carefully first. But this time, something moves slightly outside that pattern. You're still observing, but there's no tension in it. You're still aware. But you're not guarding yourself, like sitting down in a chair and realizing you don't need to adjust to find comfort. It's already there. Everything just fits. You may not say this out loud, because there's no clear proof. No story you could tell that would fully explain it. Nothing dramatic enough to justify why you feel this way. Just a familiarity that's difficult to name. And sometimes, that's exactly what makes you pause. There are small moments when you notice something shifting in you. You don't rehearse what you're going to say. You don't overthink how you're coming across. You just respond. So naturally, that afterward, you almost catch yourself thinking that was me without trying. And for Taurus, that doesn't happen all the time. But along with that ease, something else begins to move in quietly. Not quite worry. Not exactly fear. Just a subtle uneasiness. Like standing in a space that feels almost too calm and wondering if you're missing something. You begin to notice more. Not because you doubt them, but because you don't recognize this feeling. That sense of not having to hold yourself together sometimes makes you aware of what used to be there. A layer of caution, a bit of control, a safe distance, and right there your body starts responding in its own way. Not loudly, not clearly, just deeper. You pick up on details you might have overlooked before. The way they go quiet, is at ease, or is something being held back? The way they look at you, is it casual? Or does it carry something more? You don't try to analyze it, but you can't help feeling it, like touching water. You don't measure the temperature. You know instantly whether it's warm or cold, and sometimes that knowing comes faster than thought. You might wonder if it's just coincidence, if maybe you're feeling too much, but there's no clear answer to that. And maybe there doesn't need to be one. Because what's happening here isn't about being right or wrong. It's about something inside you starting to open a little deeper than usual. A kind of connection that doesn't rely on many words. Doesn't need constant action. Just presence. And sometimes, that presence begins to show you more about yourself than you expected. The way you react. The way you open up. The way you hold on to what you're not ready to release. Not everything needs to be understood right away. Some things are meant to be felt over time. And for Taurus, this might be one of those rare moments when you allow yourself to stay with that feeling, without rushing to define it, without needing to move forward too quickly, just standing there and listening, not to what they're doing, but to what's beginning to shift inside you. And sometimes, that change doesn't arrive as gently as you might expect. It isn't only soft feelings. It isn't just the ease of being around someone. It begins to move into places you once believed were already settled. There are small moments when you notice yourself reacting a little more strongly than usual to things that seem minor. A passing comment. A silence that lasts just a bit longer than you thought it would. A subtle shift in the way they show up. You don't get angry. You can't quite explain what's happening. But you pause, and you stay in that pause a little longer. Like brushing against an old mark on your skin. It doesn't hurt in a clear, obvious way anymore. But there's still a faint sensitivity, just enough to remind you it's there. Taurus is used to keeping things steady. You build your emotional world the way you might build a home. Layer by layer. solid, intentional. You don't easily let the past disturb the present. And yet this person doesn't break anything apart in a visible way. They simply bring light to places you haven't really looked at. Maybe it's the feeling of not being fully understood. Maybe it's the quiet fear of being left behind. Or just a subtle discomfort when things don't follow the rhythm you're used to. None of it is new. But you've grown used to setting those things aside so you could keep moving in a more stable direction. And then, in the middle of something ordinary, you realize you're not reacting to the present moment alone. You're touching something deeper. It's not that they did something wrong. It's not that you're right. It's just something inside you has been pulled a little tighter. You might try to make sense of it. You ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? Am I overreacting? But the more you search for a clear answer, the more you notice this isn't something logic can hold. It's like morning light. It doesn't change the room itself, but it reveals details the night once softened, and once you've seen them, you can't pretend you didn't. Some days feel simple. You talk, you laugh, and everything moves as it always has. But other days, something very small stays with you longer than you'd like. Not because you're fragile, not because you're losing control, but because you're beginning to touch parts of yourself that run deeper than before. And that doesn't always feel easy, but it isn't entirely negative either. It's like opening a corner of a room you haven't stepped into for a long time. There's dust. There are things you forgot, things you're not sure you still want to keep. And at the same time, there's a quiet sense of lightness as you begin to look. You don't have to fix everything right away. You don't have to understand every reaction. Just noticing that what's coming up isn't random. Maybe this person was never meant to bring constant ease. Maybe their presence simply invites you to see more clearly how you've protected yourself in the past. The layers you built with such care. The patterns you thought were just part of who you are, but might have been ways you learned to avoid being hurt again. And as those layers start to surface, you might feel a little unsteady. Not as grounded as you once believed. Not as certain as you thought you were. And yet in that space, something else begins to form. Not control, not defense, but a different kind of awareness. You begin to see what truly belongs to you and what has only been a reaction. Not to judge, not to fix right away, just to see. And maybe that alone is already a meaningful shift. And maybe after all those quiet, almost invisible shifts, you find yourself stepping into a different kind of space. Not a distance between two people, but a space within you where things are no longer filled by constant words. There comes a very particular phase. No clear conflict. No obvious progress. Just everything seems to pause somewhere. Messages become less frequent. Conversations grow shorter. Or maybe it's simply that feeling not knowing how to continue. What once felt natural now feels suspended. No clear reason to explain it. No moment you can point to and say this is when it changed. Just you notice the space. For many people, this is where they walk away. They look for clearer answers. A steadier rhythm. Something more certain. But Taurus tends to stay a little longer. You don't rush to leave what hasn't fully revealed itself. You might not say it out loud, but you stay. You stay with that feeling just a bit longer. Not because you're waiting for something to happen. Not because you believe everything will go back to how it was. Just you're not quite ready to let go of something that still feels meaningful. There are ordinary evenings. You pick up your phone and then set it back down. No new messages. Nothing that needs a reply. And still you unlock the screen, almost out of habit. Not to look for them, but to notice they're not there. And that feeling, it's not exactly sadness, just emptiness. Like walking into a familiar room and realizing something small is missing. Not enough to disturb you, but enough to remind you something has changed. In that quiet, you begin to hear things more clearly. Things that used to be softened by constant presence. Not their words, but your own responses. You start to notice what you had grown used to, what you had come to expect, and what you had quietly placed into this connection without ever saying it out loud. No one asked you those questions. No conversation forced you to face them. It's just the silence itself guiding you there. Some days feel lighter. You go about your routine work, meals, conversations, everything moves as usual. No strong emotions. Nothing overwhelming. And then, in very small moments, a memory passes through. A sentence you once heard. A look you remember. It doesn't linger. It doesn't take over. Just enough to make you pause for a second. And in that second, you realize there were things you felt a long time ago but never fully named. Taurus doesn't feel comfortable in uncertainty for too long. You like to know where you stand, what something is, what it means. But this time the answers aren't coming from the outside. No one explains it to you. There's no final conversation that ties everything together. Only a subtle shift in how you feel. You begin to wait less. Not because you don't care anymore, but because waiting no longer feels the way it used to. You begin to look back on what's already passed, not with regret, but with a quieter kind of understanding of what truly touched you. Maybe this connection was never meant to last in the way you once imagined, but that doesn't make it any less meaningful. It's like a road you've walked, not meant to stay forever, but long enough for you to see how you've changed while moving through it. And maybe in that wordless space, you begin to understand something simple. Not every connection needs to be held together by words. Not every feeling needs to be confirmed by someone else. Sometimes, if you stay with yourself long enough, you begin to hear things you hadn't truly listened to before. Not about them, but about you. The way you love, the way you hold on, and the way you're slowly learning to loosen your grip without losing yourself. It's not about letting go in a cold, distant way. It's not about turning your back on everything that once mattered. It's more like holding on to the feeling, but no longer letting it decide how you treat yourself. Not every silence is peace. Some silences are just a form of delay. You tell yourself you're being patient, but sometimes you're simply avoiding saying what you truly feel, avoiding setting a clear boundary, avoiding asking a question you already know might not be easy to hear. For Taurus, keeping things stable can matter so much that you're willing to stay quiet just to avoid disrupting anything. You're used to keeping things okay, even when inside they're not really okay. And then, in those days when they're no longer around, you begin to hear something familiar. Not exactly longing, but the words you never said. Not just once, but again and again. There are evenings when you lie still, and in your mind, you begin to finish conversations that never actually happened. You say what you held back. You ask what you once avoided. You even imagine how they might respond. Not to blame. Not to make things heavier. Just to finally hear yourself tell the truth. And something strange happens. As you speak those words in silence, you begin to realize you've known the answers for a long time. All those moments you wanted to say, "This doesn't feel right," but chose to let it pass. The times you felt yourself shrinking a little just to hold on to something you couldn't quite define. The quiet way you convinced yourself, "Maybe I'm just overthinking this." But deep down, there's always been a part of you, very still, very quiet, that already knew. You just weren't ready to listen. Taurus doesn't let go easily. Not because you don't know how to walk away, but because you understand the value of staying. You don't give up lightly. You don't turn away just because things feel unclear. But there's a thin line between patience and staying silent for too long. And maybe this connection isn't only here for you to understand them. Maybe it's also here to show you how you've been treating yourself in silence. The way you've softened your own voice to keep things from shifting. The way you've chosen external stability over inner honesty. No one made you do that. You chose it. Because you believed it was the way to keep things from breaking. And then, there's a very small moment. No one sees it. No one is there to witness it. No big conversation happens. You just stop. You stop trying to make everything smooth. You stop telling yourself to just be patient a little longer. You stop reshaping everything into something easier to accept. You simply become honest. Not with them first, but with yourself. You admit that some things don't feel right, that there are feelings you no longer want to ignore. You admit you have limits, and recognizing that doesn't make you weak. If anything, it feels like opening a door that's been closed for too long. Not to run out of it, just to stop feeling trapped inside. And when that door opens, everything doesn't suddenly become clear. But the air changes. A little lighter. A little more real. You don't have to say everything at once. You don't have to change everything in a single day. Just not staying silent in the same old way. And maybe, from that very small moment, a different kind of connection begins to take shape. Not between you and them, but between you and yourself. A connection that doesn't require effort, doesn't need to be proven. Just listening. And not turning away when what you hear is no longer comfortable. There's a kind of courage that moves quietly. No one sees it. No one applauds it. It's simply staying with yourself a little longer, even when it no longer feels easy. Maybe they're still there. Maybe they've slowly drifted out of your life, in a very gentle way, the same way they once entered. No clear goodbye, no final moment that closes everything neatly. Just one day, you realize you're no longer thinking of them the way you used to. And this time, you're not standing still, waiting for something clear to happen. No more long pauses held together by quiet hope that things might return to how they were. You begin to move. Not chasing. Not turning away. Just returning to your own rhythm. You wake up in the morning, and the day begins without needing a special reason. You move through familiar routines, eating, working, meeting people you know. Nothing feels dramatically different, and yet, it's not quite the same anymore. There are moments when an old memory comes back. A sentence, a look, a moment you once believed would last. It doesn't hold you there for long. It just passes through. Like a soft breeze moving through an open window. You notice it. You feel it. But you don't need to hold on to it. You can still remember them. But you no longer need their response to confirm that what you felt was real. You're no longer waiting for an explanation to make everything make sense. Not because you don't care, but because you're beginning to trust your own feeling enough. You can still open your heart. Still feel deeply. Still connect. But you're no longer shrinking yourself just to keep something from breaking. No longer adjusting your emotions to match someone else's silence. There's a kind of steadiness that feels unfamiliar, something you may not have noticed before. It doesn't come from control. It doesn't come from knowing what will happen next. It comes from not being afraid of what you feel. Like learning to walk alone on a road you know well. At first it might feel empty, like something is missing. But slowly, you begin to see the road is still yours. The rhythm of your steps is still yours. Nothing has been lost. It's just being carried differently now. And maybe this connection was never only about two people. Maybe it was a mirror arriving at the right time. Not to show you who they are, but to help you see yourself more clearly in your reactions, your choices, and even in the moments you stayed silent. You begin to understand how you've grown. Not through big, dramatic changes. Not through bold decisions. But through small shifts, the times you chose to listen to yourself. The times you didn't turn away. The times you stayed even when it wasn't easy. And from there, you no longer feel the need to trade your inner peace for something outside of you. No longer holding on to a connection just because it once meant something. If one day you happen to cross paths again, maybe it will feel different. Lighter. More honest. Without the weight of unspoken things. Just two people who have walked their own separate roads. And if not, what you carry with you still remains. Not regret. Not unanswered questions. But a quiet kind of calm. A feeling that slowly becomes clearer, that you can connect. You can stay open. You can feel deeply without losing yourself. And maybe that's what you've been learning all along.